Greetings. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I am privileged to have Sphincter of Doom as my co-host, and even though this is a discussion debate, I don't want it to be confrontational. I want this to be cooperative as we search for truth. I'd like to thank Sphincter of Doom for understanding the situation I'm in. I'm actually not going to be doing very many hosting live streams. I can participate in live streams, but because of the situation with my mother's health, I could be called away to attend to an emergency anytime. And so today we decided to take the risk. And if I have to attend to something, Sphincter Doom will have the floor, and he'll take over the show until I can get back. So I'd like to thank him for trying to work with me through this. Just for what it's worth, I wasn't sure that my mother would still be around in the next 2 months. Her condition was deteriorating, and I'd like to thank everyone for their well wishes and thoughts. She was developing antibiotic resistance to a urinary tract infection, and so we were looking for alternatives to help her. The kind of things that she's 94 years old, and things that someone much younger would just be inconvenienced by could be fatal at that age. And thankfully, we came across, partly because of my colleagues who are medical researchers, just through a process of just asking around and also doing my personal research through peer-reviewed literature. We found an alternative cure. So by way of analogy, we don't need antibiotics to kill the bacteria in our mouth so that we don't develop cavities. You just brush your teeth, and you can manage the level of bacteria in your mouth. And kind of UTIs can be in that similar category if you can just eject the bacteria in the UTI, because sometimes the bacteria have a tendency to adhere to the urinary tract, to what they call the urothelium cells. There is a substance in cranberries that they found called D-mannose that prevents the bacteria from adhering, and so then it can just naturally flush out. So she's recovering well. She, whenever she has bouts like this, she starts losing her ability to talk. She becomes, it affects her nervous system. She can't walk, and she loses her appetite. She can't think clearly, but a lot of that is healing. So I just wanted to update all the people who've been concerned for my situation, and just thank them for all the well wishes there. I'd like to thank everyone that's come here tonight. Also, by mutual agreement, this can be rebroadcast on any channel here, and I'm delighted to do that. Just a little bit of promotion. I asked if Sphincter of Doom if I could host this on this channel, so that I could also help build it out, because I have a low subscriber base. If you go to www.evidenceandreasons.org, there are links to my 2 YouTube channels. One of them is the channel you're watching now, and the other is the Evidence and Reasons Academy, where I'm giving lectures on chemistry, molecular biology, and other basic sciences. My motivation for doing this is that in order to be more effective in my professional responsibilities, I realized I need to relearn some basic things that I had taken in school and have been now mostly forgotten. And one way to learn is to teach. And I realized if I make videos, I could teach, and then also there might be others who benefit. So that basically decided it for me that I was going to go through the project. So there are already about 4 or 5 chemistry lectures there and 1 molecular biology lecture. So this is what I might be doing for, God willing, in the coming year. Although my contract with Dr. John Sanford is getting a little busy right now. We were supposed to wind it down, but he's wanting more work, which is, I'm still happy. I'm happy about that. But I'm getting a lot of emails from him lately for me to do things. So with that, Sphincter of Doom, shall I call you that, or do you have a...
You can call me Josh. That's fine. Sphincter of Doom's a little long. You can call me Doom or Sphinx. I mean, whatever is easy. Like, something short is fine for me. And
I like Sphinx. That's cool.
Okay.
Feel free to introduce yourself and promote your channels, or
well, I don't have
whatever's
a
on your
channel.
heart.
I don't have a channel to promote, but I'm Sphincter of Dooms, Josh, that guy. I was a nuclear technician in the Navy. After that, I got my degree in chemical engineering. Shortly afterward, did work in industrial gases, particularly cryogenic distillation. And I'm by no means a scientist. I mean, engineers aren't scientists, but I'm definitely an enthusiast of it. And I like examining things philosophically, breaking them down too. So having these kind of conversations, and even when you're having a conversation with someone with whom you disagree, you often learn something yourself, and like, oh, I didn't think of it this way, and I have to. You kind of learn how to engage other points, and at the very least, it keeps you kind of sharp. And a proper debate / discussion, one or both people walk away having learned something, and that's what I aim for, and that's what I hope, and that's
First off, did you say that you served on submarines, or?
No, I originally was going to be on subs, but some bureaucratic stuff prevented me from that, and so I just went on carriers. So I was a big.
Wow. First off, I want to thank you very much for your service, and I try to thank and express my appreciation for all the veterans. So thank you very much for your service, sir. So we were going to talk about abiogenesis. I can share a little bit about my background. I had grown up in a Roman Catholic home, and I went to public school, and that's where I learned about. I don't know that they actually gave the term abiogenesis in my class.
Mm-hmm.
They were showing these things like the Urey-Miller experiment. This was like in the 1970s, mid 70s, so you could tell how old I am. I'm getting up there.
You've aged well.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you. So I actually saw these pictures of creatures evolving. And so there's a nice, beautiful progression. It's still a very compelling progression where you have like the sea creature, and then it's coming out of the water. Its descendants are specifically. And then the creature becomes a mammal, and then a primate, and then you have a human being. And then it was in the Collier's Encyclopedia. Toward the end, you see mankind learning to make fire, and then build rocket ships and travel to the stars. And I said, that's actually a very beautiful thought for the universe, just eternal progression. Now, that's a very naive way of perhaps presenting evolutionary theory, but to a child, that was very appealing, the idea of universal and permanent progress. So that's a little bit of my background. Maybe a year after I became a Christian, I began to read tracts from the Institute of Creation Research, and that was the beginning of my persuasion that life was too complex to have naturally arisen. And so, but I was an old earth creationist most of my life going through college. I nearly left the Christian faith 20 years ago because I was not satisfied with the answers I was getting from church. I'd ask really basic questions and I'd be brushed off. I'd be ostracized, which was really not very nice because I didn't get treated that way in school. I'd ask a question and you'd see the professor would be welcoming of the question and do his best to try to answer it. Whereas when I was in church, the parishioners and even some of the pastors took offense that you wanted to learn something about how to solve a tough. So I hung out with a lot of atheists, and so I nearly left the faith. That was a very bitter experience for me that I'm still kind of bitter about. I don't get completely along well with some of the church culture and even some of the creationists. So on some levels, I'm very receptive to hearing criticisms because being an engineer, you're skeptical of what you do. You're grateful when someone wants to review your work and challenge it and question it, because especially if you're in a safety critical field where people's lives are depending on what you do, you want someone to question what you're doing and challenge it and test it and subject it to to test, because then you feel confident. And when they do find mistakes, you're grateful. You don't take offense. I mean, yeah, it feels bad that you were wrong, but on the whole, you're actually grateful that someone caught your mistake. And
Well,
that's
absolutely. I think really it's almost empowering. If your ideas or approach withstands scrutiny, it's that much more vindicated. And if it doesn't, then it gives you direction of where to go or not go.
yeah. So that I just kind of giving the my background. So what had happened though is, as I was debating the origins debate, so I think some of the young Earth creationists will not like me saying this, but I think people like Erica and DapperDino and some of the crew actually do have legitimate questions that I've seen young Earth creationists themselves raise. Maybe they're not totally out there in the forefront. They've admitted it. You look through their literature, like, for example, accelerated nuclear decay. I can tell you some things that young Earth creationists have written that are very sympathetic to what someone like Erica would say. And just like, yeah, so I'm not here to say that the young Earth creationists have plugged all the major problems in their model. However, for origin of life, that was a different story. So there are people like Cy Gart, who are theistic evolutionists. He was an atheist turned Christian, who think the origin of life is a pretty tough barrier to overcome for naturalism. So, did you have any thoughts about this, or were you? How would you like this conversation to move forward?
Well, that's an excellent way to segue. So I think we can both agree that as of right now, what the origin of life is, we're not sure. Like scientifically, we can't really we haven't demonstrated what the origin of life is. We have little bits and pieces. We can say, oh well, it could have happened this way, or like God could have done it this way, but really we don't have all the pieces yet. So it is really unknown, but we have something, and we've ruled some things out, but we don't have the whole picture. Like where with evolution, we have a much clearer picture as to what is or isn't happening. But I think part of the problem, I think, is like first we have to get to how are we defining life? Because life does, like, if you just broke down life, it does consist of otherwise non-living materials under different conditions. So like where is the demarcation there? As like at what point do we consider it life? And I think that's part of the problem of the debate itself. I mean, we know that the Miller-Urey experiments, especially when the sealed vials were re-examined in 2008, over 20 different amino acids formed in that. Adenine has been shown to spontaneously form. We have, RNA polymerase it self-catalyzes. Like we have, like I said, we have bits and pieces, but since we haven't replicated the whole chain, it definitely invites a lot of room for skepticism, and I think not unreasonably so. But I think one of the mistakes I think a lot of creationists make is they fall into the trap of, because we don't know everything, we can just say it must be false and therefore creationism, which it could be wrong from a naturalistic standpoint because we don't know we don't have enough, but that doesn't mean you can default to say it must have been creationism or some particular form of creationism, because it could have been, what if it was panspermia, where life originated somewhere else, either by divine means or natural means, something which we couldn't test at all because the environment in which it originated, and then it somehow was deposited onto Earth. Like that's not something we can really easily test, although we found some biological molecules in space, but again, that's just bits and pieces.
So actually, this is interesting. The definition of life, you could actually try to address that and what the problem
Right.
we are trying to solve. If I could share a slide, I'm actually I'm trying to teach a molecular biology course,
Mm-hmm.
and as I said, one way to learn is to try to teach. I had the privilege of working with a molecular cell biologist by the name of Change Laura Tan. Some of the viewers may know of her. She is the co-author of the book with Rob Stadler, The Stairway to Life. She is a professor at a secular university. She was born and raised in communist China. She came to the United States. She was a non-Christian when she arrived. She became a Christian and then a creationist. I don't know which came first, whether she was a Christian first or a creationist first. I've heard stories of different ways people have become creationists or Christians. It can sometimes be they become a creationist first. She had gotten, she's a Harvard postdoctoral fellow, Ivy League trained physical organic chemist. She's very smart. And it was a Nobel Prize winner, George Smith, an eventual Nobel Prize winner, 2018, that had recruited her, encouraged her to study molecular biology, even though her specialty really was physical organic chemistry. But I think he saw that she had the right skill set, and having been a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Medical School, doing a little research on frogs, she was qualified. She just may not have had formal biological training. So anyway, I'm teaching that class, and the first question that came up is, what is life? So let me see if I can put this on the slideshow. And I said, she didn't quite define it, but what I did is I said, well, I'll show you at least two definitions of life. One is kind of indirect.
Well,
The
to be
first
clear,
one, I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, what I mean is that we don't have. I didn't mean to imply that we didn't have a good definition of life. It's just that whenever we're having a discussion about the origin of life, we have to agree on the definition before we can even discuss it. That's all I meant. So
no, that's fine. And I wanted to point out there are two definitions that that float around there. One that favors the origin of life researchers, and one that practicing biologists use. So this was Virchow's cell theory, omnia cellula e cellula. All cells arise from pre-existing cells. This was in the mid-19th century, before they even understood the molecular basis of life. Mm-hmm. He wasn't the original one, but he's the one who got the credit. So you know how that goes. Sometimes the guy who actually thought of it first isn't necessarily the guy who gets credit. And
sad Leibniz noises.
Yeah, I know. This was in the book Biochemistry. One of the biochemistry textbooks that I use is Molecular Basis of Life by McKee and McKee. And it's basically Virchow's cell theory. Cells arise only from the division of existing cells. So I suggested this informal definition of life. There is this open source biology Libre text, and this is their version of cell theory. It says, the cell is the fundamental unit of structure and function in living things. All organisms are made up of one or more cells. Cells arise from other cells through cellular division. And so this is my informal definition of life. People don't have to agree with me, but this is the way that I frame the origin of life debate. And if people frame it differently, that's fine. We just have to recognize that. So I say life is that which is made of cells. Now, this differs from NASA's definition. NASA's definition is life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. So there's a little bit, this is the one that a lot of origin of life researchers, that's the definition they use. So when they build a kind of autocatalytic RNA system, like an RNA replicator, they'll call that life. Whereas that's not exactly cellular life.
Well, the problem with defining life that way is that, like, the NASA definition allows for the possibility to test whether or not life could have originated before the existence of the cell. Whether they do or don't succeed in that test is another question. But if the problem with defining life that as needing a cell, now you've precluded the ability to you've kind of defined the parameters where you can't be wrong in a way, and that's it's a little too limiting, I think. It doesn't mean that your conclusion is wrong, of course, but you know what I'm saying? Where
I think I kind of get the drift of what you're saying, and I don't think we'll necessarily resolve which definition we should adopt, but for people like me, is the end point, so to speak, of abiogenesis is a working cell. It's, if you want to say that the intermediate steps are also living, I'm willing to grant that for the sake of argument. So, like, if they want to say that the RNA, some of these RNA autocatalytic reactions are living, it's like, okay, I'll accept it for the sake of argument, but I'll say that's not cellular life. The problem we're trying to solve is cellular life. And if I could show kind of the way that I conceive the origin of life problem,
Okay.
I'm a very visual person. That's just kind of in my nature, because that's the way I think.
Hey, I'm all for whatever, however best you can convey what you're thinking. Like, that's how relatable information is like the key to teaching or even really communication. So go for it.
So this is kind of, this illustrates the way that I conceptualize the origin of life problem and probability. This is kind of a tent of just two cards. And there are actually many ways we can arrange the cards that are very improbable, just as a matter of principle. So it's how this relates to the origin of cellular life. There are many, many ways to implement a cellular life. We could just see that by the variety of bacteria, just bazillions of different kinds of cellular architectures. So there are many ways to implement life, just as there are many ways to make a house of cards. The way that I look at life is that it's a possible chemical configuration, but it's improbable as a matter of principle. And that, to say improbable as a matter of principle is a little bit difficult to actually describe that, but that's actually how some of the older creationist arguments were not very strong, in that they kind of had single targets to do their probability, and that really was kind of weak. And to have a little bit more general probability arguments, a little bit more difficult. But we can contrast cards that are lying flat, even though there are probably an infinite number of configurations we can. Someone could write a probability argument and say, oh, that arrangement is so improbable it's a miracle, and it'd be just a totally bogus argument. And some of the creationist arguments of 40 years ago were almost as bad as that. Kind of the better ones would be considering, are there states of matter that are just improbable as a matter of principle? That's a little bit harder to achieve, and that's kind of been my focus in trying to frame the origin of life, so that we don't have these kind of what they call single target specifications. I'm not sure if you've heard about that. It's like the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, or have you heard of those?
The Texas sharpshooter fallacy, as I understand it, is essentially someone shoots at a barn and then paints the bullseye around his grouping and then says he hit a bullseye. It's basically a fishing expedition in that regard. But I'm not really sure what that has to do with what I guess I don't see the connection with what you're trying to say here.
Okay. So this was the pictured here is the I'll try to connect it. Thank you for asking me that. This is the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, where he was shooting at a barn or a wall, and then afterward he painted bullseyes around it and said, look how incredible my aim is and how improbable that was. And it's not a really very good argument. So what I was trying to say is that the first barrier that I encountered was to try to avoid making probability arguments that are Texas sharpshooter fallacies.
Okay.
And if I define life as being cellular life, that sounds very much like a Texas sharpshooter fallacy. And that's what I wanted to kind of reduce. So
Okay.
people had that objection that I defined life as cellular. What I wanted
Well,
to say was that there are aspects of cellular life that are more like, let me see if I could show the
well, the main
aspect. Yeah,
well,
go on.
one of the issues with defining cellular life that way is that there very well could have been simpler forms of life that were over time outcompeted by now more complex forms of life. That's which is why we don't see them now. So that possibility is not is precluded in that definition. Now we can't assume that that actually happened as well because we don't know if that's what happened. But at the same time, we have to allow for that possibility and then try to construct an experiment to test it. And that's one of my problems with defining that. Now, if you want to say cells or cellular life, I mean, I guess there's no problem with that. But that's kind of tautological, I guess. But
Well, maybe the thing, I mean, that's actually a very good point, that I shouldn't try to form the argument in terms of saying that I'm precluding other forms of life along the way. So I think that's a good way to frame the argument, is we'll admit the possibility of other life forms that are not cellular life that are on that pathway. So I think I'm fine just assuming that for the sake of argument and for discussion, because that's important.
mhm.
So I think we're in agreement there.
Okay.
We can put that on the table as a legitimate possibility that has to be dealt with. So what some creationists have done is that, it's like, well, they invoke that it all has to be there all at once, and the other side will say, well, maybe there was a gradual um, step of things happening incrementally so that the probabilities are not so outrageous. So that is where there's kind of that's probably the two lines of thought that are in conflict. The idea does the cell have to be pretty much all there at once? What I call the everything first model. I call that the everything first model, because in or abiogenesis, they've had other models like metabolism first, proteins first. That one's not too popular anymore. DNA first, RNA first. And the creationist model is, they say everything first because everything has to be there. And as you said, that's precluding some of the intermediate steps. So what we could do is, let's just say, assume that they're intermediate steps. Let's see how feasible they are. That might be the only, we probably will not be able to eliminate every route, but we might be able to see some of the problems.
Well, I'm not
So,
sure if feasible is the right characterization. I think really, how testable are they? Like, can we examine these in any way? And some of them might be outside our ability to test, and maybe there's just too many factors to account for. That's like, I am not. I mean, I'm an atheist, and I would obviously like to say, oh, like a lot of atheists go with, there's everything is explained naturally. Like, I don't think that's necessarily true. There are things that may be beyond human understanding, that even if it even if God doesn't exist, it might still be beyond our understandings. We could never really prove that it was a naturalistic thing. And the other issue is that by God, whatever form God is, if it's supernatural, the only way in which we can experience any influence that God has is that projection into the natural world, which is indistinguishable from a natural process. So that is philosophically problematic, in which one is it kind of thing. And it's easy to be super dismissive. It's like, well, because you can't tell the difference, we might as well just pretend like God doesn't exist, because that also is, it's just as logically problematic as assuming he does. So I'm ranting and going off on a tangent, I think. But I apologize. I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
well, hopefully we'll get you back on rail.
So, well,
That happens. I lose my train of thought too, and
right.
that's perfectly fine. That's the nature of this conversation.
Oh, right.
We're
The different avenues and intermediates. That's right. But yeah, there are limitations to what we can and can't test, and that's really all we can go with. Like, if we can't really, it very well may be the case that abiogenesis was by some divine origin, and we just haven't ruled out all the natural possibilities yet. But we also don't know yet, is kind of thing. It's just, and that's I guess my problem with the creationist side is that the assumption that wherever the gaps that we have in our scientific knowledge are, that it must creation just makes up for it, which I think is premature. And at the same time, I take issue with a lot of atheists who simply say, well, I'm just going to operate on the assumption that God doesn't exist, so there must be some natural explanation that we haven't found yet. I mean, that's just as logically superficial as just assuming any unexplained phenomenon must be due to God just by default. And that's kind of what the point I was trying to get at in a roundabout way. Sorry, I apologize.
Actually, that's very informative to me, because every atheist, one atheist doesn't necessarily represent another atheist in terms of the way their viewpoint. In fact, there was a study by Christopher Silver, and he kind of profiled the way that their outlooks in 6 different psychological profiles, which is somewhat an arbitrary categorization, because one could certainly even make it even more. And I'm impressed that you're kind of seeing this, that neither side can absolutely prove their point in the most formal sense, because we weren't there in that sense. We are taking what little we know and trying to extrapolate it. And I think both sides need to at least admit that. And,
yes. And
yeah.
I honestly have issues with a lot of, maybe not the atheist community at large, but a vocal segment of them that are just dismissive of religion in general, and they kind of refuse to. This is just my personal experience. So, but a lot of them tend to refuse to really understand why someone has the position they do, and they just kind of assume like, that person must be dumb. It's like, it's rarely that simple. It's maybe there's something they don't know, or maybe maybe the religious argument is satisfactory and they just didn't bother looking further into it. But at the same time, a lot of atheists probably reached a satisfactory conclusion and then just never looked further into it as well. So
yes, and I'm and then coming from the Christian side, I've seen kind of the well, I shared some of my experiences where questions were not welcome, and that was just very distasteful. It's like you're not even trying to think about this. And
yeah, I was raised in a Baptist household. I never really was, quote unquote, sold on religion. I made what I thought to be an honest attempt. It just never really clicked for me. And the few questions I had, if I were to play devil's advocate, I'm not sure they necessarily were antagonistic towards questions in principle. They probably were just like, they didn't have an answer and they just kind of wanted to get away from that conversation. But that's just me. I mean, I don't know. I don't know your experience.
Oh, my experience was just terrible. I mean, it left an extremely bitter taste. And I'm just like, well, wouldn't you want to have your questions answered? Wouldn't that strengthen people's faith if you want? So what I'm going to put on the table in terms of the origin of life, what makes it really hard for me to believe, I'm not going to say this applies to anyone else. All we could do is just say, okay, these are the numbers I came up with, and this is what's persuasive for me. I'm not going to tell anyone what they're going to believe. The book, have you heard of Change Tan's book and Rob Stadler? It came out in 2019. Let me see if I have a copy of it here.
I'm not familiar with the book.
Okay,
but
let me share it with you.
Aspects of it, yeah.
And this is probably the best. The reason first of all, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm in the acknowledgement section here as a reviewer, but I'm not really a peer reviewer because the authors are just like way beyond who I am. So Change Tan and Rob Stadler. In Change Tan, I'll just read a little bit, and this is just promotion. This is what I think is a good way to just put on the table my arguments, because my arguments are really theirs. Change Tan received a BS in chemistry from Hunan Normal University and an MS in organic chemistry from Nankai University, a PhD in biochemistry from University of Pennsylvania, and also completed postdoctoral training in genetics at Harvard Medical School. She's an associate professor, which means she's tenured in the biological sciences at the College of Arts and Science at the University of Missouri. Despite the fact she's tenured, she's getting a lot of flack because she's an open young earth creationist at secular university. Her co-author is Rob Stadler. He also has impressive credentials. He got his MS in electrical engineering at MIT. He got his PhD in medical engineering from Harvard MIT Division of Health Sciences and Technology. He has 140 US patents, medical devices that are implanted in millions of patients worldwide. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to state some sour grapes. I'm like, these guys don't get enough attention in the creationist community. I could probably offend some people if I say who really does get attention in the creationist community, and they're not as qualified as these people. So I'm just introducing this book. And if one wanted to actually investigate the issues, this is very powerful. Now, I would presume that since you had a background in chemical engineering, you probably are aware of some of the formation of the original molecules. But the one that really did it for me is this consistent linkage of building blocks. This was a really tough, I mean, I read Change Tan's original work, and the first version of her book I crawled through because it looks like this, just all these chemical diagrams, one right after the other. And what she was saying is that, and I'll do this for the sake of the viewers. So if some of this is nothing new to you, I'm partly saying this for the benefit of the viewers.
Sure.
Is that, let me see if I could show the picture. So to be able to read DNA, it has to be kind of in a linear, somewhat linear readable format. Because if we had these Scrabble letters and just threw them down, it's kind of hard to read it. It's nicer if you can get it in a nice readable format. By readable, I mean that they're arranged in a way that a machine or molecular machine can go through and read it like a tape. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I only have 6 letters. Now, the nucleotides, the way that they can form with the nucleobases, the deoxyribose and the phosphate groups, they can be misarranged so that you can get formations like this, and it's not readable. It ends up being, if they start to form covalent bonds, they could form covalent bonds, and you get a mess like that. Change Tan is very familiar with this process because she's a molecular biologist, and she says, look at all that we have to do, because she studied this Artificial Life by Craig Ventnor, and she was just like saying, look, this very nice arrangement here just doesn't form naturally. And when I saw this, I said, yeah, I wouldn't want to be arguing that this can form even gradualistically in steps. And so that in brief is like some of the arguments. If I remember, I think if it's okay with you, I'm going to share kind of the negotiations of our discussion. I was actually proposing a 50-hour discussion at first.
Okay.
And we were going to spread it out. And I said, nah, that's kind of, we don't know where that's going to go. But it basically would have been going through that entire book step by step. It would have been just kind of brutal But when I read through that book, at this stage in my life, it'd just be really too hard to think that life isn't a miracle. So I'm just, that's probably kind of a very short summary of why I find abiogenesis. It seems to me it would have to be a miracle. And she addresses, both Rob Stadler and Change Tan address the idea of the intermediate steps. They say, well, if the cell is kind of halfway there, if the parts are halfway there, it kind of disassembles. And yes, we might be able to try to imagine intermediate steps, but they always seem to be more complicated. So it would be fair to say that we can't probably exhaust every possibility, but for people on my side, it's a bigger step of faith to think it could happen naturally, because chemistry has a lot of natural disorganizing forces that
it has a lot of naturally organizing forces too.
Yes.
Like, so I mean, well, I guess what's the problem?
Oh, the problem is the way that life is constructed is that it looks like it's organized in a way that is in conflict with the natural disorganizing forces. That was kind of the picture I was trying to show. She was going through kind of the molecular considerations, because when they try to build DNA synthetically, like let's say we had a computer program like Craig Ventnor had, where he had a bazillion of bases in mind, and he wanted to synthesize it. He'll just tell the laboratory, he said, make a DNA stretch like that. And the process is just gruesomely difficult, because of all the likelihood that you will not get even you'll not get anything even resembling a double helix. That the covalent connections will not. Let me just show this again.
Well, it's not even necessarily the case that it had like life or self-replicating molecules had to start with DNA. I mean, it could have been something simpler. But I think the other thing is this is just something that came to mind immediately. So it's maybe an oversimplified example. So when a polyprotic acid disassociates naturally, even does that mean that there wasn't the natural force that assembled that initially until it was under the conditions that caused it to dissociate? I mean, the fact that there are disorganizing forces at play that could rip it apart doesn't mean that it does pull it apart, because there's only certain conditions will pull it apart. And there are conditions that keep it together. So I don't think it's sufficient to say, well, there's all these things that are trying to pull it apart, so it must be the case that it couldn't have survived naturally on its own to reach this point.
She cites the work of origin of life researcher Steve Benner, and he actually, it was really kind of amazing that he's still in the business, because he wrote something that read like a creationist tract. He listed all the reasons why life shouldn't form naturally, and one of them was what he called the asphalt paradox. Let me see if I could find it. I don't know that I have it handy. Let me see if I could find it here. I'm going to look for the asphalt paradox. And here, asphalt paradox. See if I could put it up here. Now, he in no way is a creationist. I really want to emphasize that. Some people have said I'm misquoting him or whatever. That's not my intent, or that I'm quote mining him. I'm merely pointing out what he said, and what had happened is he never. He listed all the problems with origin of life theory, and then.
Well, to be fair, you could be not a creationist. You could be a theistic evolutionist and also believe that the origin of life had a divine origin. I mean, it depends on what you mean by creationism, because there are a lot of.
Okay.
I mean I don't know much about Steve Benner, but I mean, if he, depending on there are like subdivisions of creationists where some there are theistic evolutionists, and then there's creationists that don't believe in evolution, or they just simply don't accept the origin of life is naturalistic. Or okay, what's the
So this is actually a quote that she shares in her, Dr. Tan shares in her molecular biology class. And this is from Steve Benner. And he listed all these paradoxes. The paper is, there's a specific paper there, but the title of the article was The Paradoxes of Life. And he listed all these paradoxes. One of them was the asphalt paradox. So this kind of, in general, talks about the disorganizing forces. He says, the asphalt paradox, an enormous amount of empirical data have established as a rule that organic systems given energy and left to themselves devolve to give uselessly complex mixtures, quote unquote asphalts. They're not literally asphalts, that's a figure of speech.
sure?
Theory that enumerates small molecule space as well as structure theory in chemistry can be construed to regard this devolution a necessary consequence of theory.
What is meant by left to themselves? Because I mean, we see. I mean,
sure.
if left to themselves is just okay, they have energy and they're the normal naturalistic processes of our metabolisms are going. If that's all it is, then I would have to disagree that they just devolve into that. I'm not sure what he means by left to themselves.
I'll give we can give some very specific examples. Like if we start out with a homochiral mix of amino acids, they will spontaneously turn racemic. You don't have to add any outside energy into the system. Just the random molecules bouncing around will cause it to become racemic, and it's very hard to build stable proteins in that situation. Now, the homochirality of amino acids, there are a few papers that talk about how that can be overcome, but the problem is we have spontaneous hydrolysis. There are half-lives for DNA, so there are a lot of chemical half-lives. That's just really well known. So even though he's given kind of a general overview, there are lots of chemical half-lives. Like RNAs, the reason like some of these vaccines have to be stored down at minus 70 degrees Celsius or something like that, and even then it starts to break apart. There are all these spontaneous reactions because of the internal energy, what we might colloquially call heat energy. If there's any amount of temperature there, just the collision of the atoms and their vibrations start to break
Right.
Covalent bonds. And I think that's what he was referring to.
I think like what you're saying is that that's just that, without any kind of metabolic process that disrupts thermodynamic equilibrium, chemical mixtures eventually reach equilibrium. But I mean, that's something very different from organic molecules just evolve. Like there are organic molecules that drive our metabolism as well. So taken in isolation with no other molecules around to drive a disequilibrium or a different equilibrium, sure, but that's not that's not how life works, and that's not necessarily what the prebiotic chemical environment was.
So what I would what I'd like to say regarding this, I think your criticism is well founded in terms of his choice of words, and it's certainly worth pursuing. But one way that some people have said this is that life is it's kind of in a quasi-equilibrium. Death is the most equilibrium state, whereas the organization of life is kind of, there are aspects of it that are far from equilibrium.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
the nature of life is to create disequilibrium. Like pretty much all of our metabolisms and catabolic things is creating disequilibria for the purpose of creating usually driving some form of homeostasis, or even just reproduction. But I mean, I don't think that's really a problem for life or the origin of life or a potential natural explanation for life. It doesn't prove a natural explanation of life either, but the fact that, I mean, I struggle to think of an aspect of life that isn't creating some sort of disequilibrium.
Well, I think we're in agreement on one point, that life is in a situation of disequilibrium,
Yeah.
if I understood you correctly. And it just has this strong tendency that just a little bit of perturbation, it can die. And if it's like, say, quote unquote, half alive, or it has a lot of the parts there, it just doesn't spontaneously, there's no inherent tendency for it to spontaneously assemble into something that will be able to do what life does in terms of replication, reproduction, metabolism. But if I could just, again, I'm just sharing these papers for your perusal. This is kind of how I illustrated the asphalt paradox. That was from that was from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And there was one other thing that Benner said. Thus, even if we solve the asphalt paradox, the water paradox, the information need paradox, and the single biopolymer paradox, we still must mitigate or set aside chemical theory that makes destruction, not biology, the natural outcome of our already magical chemical system. I can send you this paper if for your perusal.
Sure. I would argue that biology is just a creative form of destruction, but
so perhaps if this is amenable to you, oops, that's my chemistry lecture. There's some people that are asking questions in the chat.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm happy to answer. Like, we can go through questions. I'm fine with that.
Okay. So guys, I've only seen a few things in the chat because I'm trying to focus on my co-host here and what he's saying, and I probably missed a flood of questions that were directed at me.
Well, I saw DapperDino, and maybe I should say he's not sure what creative form of destruction means. I'm happy. Maybe I should clarify that. What I meant was biology is creation through destruction. You destroy certain things and you create something as a result. So, I mean, again, like most things of this, the devil's in the details of how we define our terms. I mean, maybe what he meant by destruction is not what I mean by destruction, he being Benner. So, but I forgive me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That was just the first thing.
Oh, no, so that was DapperDino. He said, not sure what creative form of destruction means. Okay, so let's see. Evidence, DapperDino asked, evidence and reasons for Sphincter. Why are robots superior to humans?
Well, that's because humans are lame. So there's a running joke among my friends that I am a robot. Part of it is that I mean, I'm actually on the autism spectrum, and we tend to have emotional blind spots, and I'm pretty comfortable with being open about that, and it's just something I work on, and that informs part of the running joke.
I missed a little bit of what you said.
Which part? Where did I lose you?
Beginning, because there was some machine noise here on my end. I'm trying to turn on my heater.
So there's a running joke among my friends that I'm actually a robot because I tend to act. I'm somewhat stoic, and I'm sometimes insensitive, but I'm actually slightly on the autism spectrum. So it's just kind of a joke that I'm not really a human. I'm a robot. And I mean, I'm comfortable with that kind of thing. It's a big deal.
So guys, if guys in the chat, if I miss a question, please remind me. I'm not very good at multitasking, so apologies in advance. So let's see, Immutable Destiny. He says a lot of the problems. Oh, there's a thing I can do. Let me see if I could do this.
There's one by Danny.
Then I don't have to read it. Okay.
Oh, okay. Is that a question? I think
that's he's contesting the way I'm some of what Benner is saying, and I don't agree with that.
I'm not familiar
But,
enough with Benner's argument to really
yeah.
attack or defend that any more than what I've read here, so I can't really comment further.
So for the benefit of the viewers, and especially since I have direct contact with the authors of Stairway to Life, I'd encourage people that if they haven't seen the video of Rob Stadler giving his presentation on the Stairway to Life on the Standing for Truth channel, that they see it. Because I'm doing, because I am trying to recapitulate Change Laura Tan's molecular biology class, it's actually structured. So this is a little bit of a giveaway. If you look at her molecular biology class, it looks very similar to her book, Stairway to Life. So she deliberately tried to teach a molecular biology class that would fit in a secular university, that everything she's citing is textbook, peer-reviewed stuff. And then you compare that to what she wrote in Stairway to Life, you'll see that there are a lot of similarities. So where all this is going, for the viewer's sake, perhaps over the next, God willing, over the coming year, as I teach Dr. Tan's molecular biology class, you're actually going to be walking through elements of the Stairway to Life. So some of the things that Immutable Destiny just raised, we can explore that. Hopefully we'll try. So another question.
I believe above Immutable Destiny's post there is by Danny. He has a question posed to both of us.
Okay, let me see. Immutable. Do you think there's a fact of the matter as to what constitutes life? I think, short answer, no. There is an argument as to what constitutes life, but I think the real question is not what constitutes life. It's like, okay, how probable is it that we're alive, or anything's, what we would call a cell? How probable is it? Certainly no one in the origin of life community will say, oh, it all just came together all at once. And so the question is now, how probable are those kind of gradual steps along the way so that it's not so improbable? And I've said that I don't think we can formally eliminate all possibilities because we're not God. But each of us will kind of make our best estimate of how believable one set of arguments are over another. Did you have any thoughts, Sphinx?
Well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, and I do have a penchant for not answering that question properly, so forgive me. Really, we can decide what we define life as and when it comes to answering questions about life. So what constitutes life is up to us, and then what are the important kind of questions we can get from that, and what kind of answers there are. So yes, there's a fact that there is some kind of life that we can define, and what that definition is and what meaning we can derive from that is what matters.
Sorry, I was just I was providing some things that your friends here. Hey, that's a nice thing for DapperDino to say. My apologies to the viewers if I know I'm missing questions. And
well, when it comes to shade, I'm usually the one casting a shadow because I tend to tower over people because I'm a taller individual.
Now, if someone let me just suggest this, because I just realized there's a tag feature. So if someone says at Evidence Reasons Academy or either evidence, let me see if that will work.
I see logical, plausible, probable asked me a question. Let's see if there's something before that.
Okay. I'm going to log out of, if you see me looking here, I'm going to log out of one of my accounts. Because as I said, I have two YouTube channels. One's my Evidence Reasons Academy. Once as soon as I log in, people can start tagging my evidence reasons account, and then I can probably be a little bit more efficient in trying to respond. So go ahead. You had a question you wanted to try to.
So logical, plausible, probable asks to me, although I'm happy, time permitting, for you to weigh in as well. Do you think there are any chemical processes which are implausible to occur without an intelligent agent being necessary, regardless of time available? Implausible? I mean, that's really kind of asking how imaginative I am. But I don't think there's any necessary ones that's implausible. The question is what is not possible or not testable. Because what's kind of problematic is that even if something is true, if we can't test it, we can't scientifically examine it, which means that for all intents and purposes we don't know. But to answer his question, no, I don't think of anything that's particularly implausible that requires an intelligent agent. There might be instances where an intelligent agent is sufficient, but that doesn't tell us anything about whether it's necessary.
I'll take that one. We do have, we can hypothesize some chemical behaviors that are implausible as a matter of principle. We call that, when we frame things in terms of the Gibbs free energy, we can say certain things it's not the natural expectation. So in the absence of any, I gave an example where in the absence of any other mitigating factors, if we have a pool of amino acids that are all left-handed homochiral, they will spontaneously, the Gibbs free energy will say that they will become racemic. It'll be a mix of left and right-handed, and that yields a certain Gibbs free energy. And then conversely, if you start off with a racemic mixture in the absence of any mitigating factors, it's just not going to spontaneously become homochiral. In fact, you'll have to add energy to the system according to the Gibbs energy. So
that's true. Oh, I'm sorry. Go finish.
Go on, man. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say I agree that those two things are true, but it's important to the key point is absent any other factors. It would be inappropriate to assume there are no other factors present, and in fact, it's not a closed system either. Energy, that is a system that would allow energy to be added as well. Whether energy was added or not is certainly a question, but I think that's just an important thing to acknowledge. That. But sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I was about to say that diagram I showed at the homo linkage from Change 10's book with that chemical diagram of DNA, that can also be framed in the Gibbs free energy for it to be able to be arranged that way. That's why it's so difficult to make that reaction happen. It has to be almost like, since you're a chemical engineer, you probably can explain the process where you have to compartmentalize the reactions, and then you get so you have the reactants and then the products, and then the products become reactants for the next reaction, and you have all these reaction chambers along the way. The formation of synthetic DNA kind of follows along that way, although they don't have reaction chambers. What they have to do is stop the reaction, pull out all the chemicals, and restart the reaction with a different set. It's just a brutally painful, slow process.
Well, that's definitely true, but it's also important to remember that not all reactions are reversible. So, I mean, some reactants, become products, and then they're reactants in the next reaction, but you don't have to worry about them reverting. You just have to worry about the proper conditions for, the yield that you need, or you have the catalyst, because you don't want to overcook your polymer or undercook it, as it were. But there's no hard fast rule on that, so it's easy to find exceptions to that. But as a general rule, yeah, most chemical processes are not single step.
Yes, and that's where I was headed with that. That really, I mean, I always like to keep reinvestigating, but what has happened over the last 20 years is, as the data has come in, as I studied it more, it became hard to believe in abiogenesis. This is an excellent question by DapperDino.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Sal. I don't know how it works that my handle is Evidence and Reasons. My name is Sal, but the way YouTube does it on the chat, it's Evidence and Reasons. He said, let's say that tomorrow someone proved 100% that abiogenesis is not only possible, but certainly happened on Earth. Would that change your stance on God? Yes. Yes, that would be very unsettling.
May I ask why? Because wouldn't it not be possible that God decided what the natural laws were and allowed it to happen, or knew it was going to happen in that way after setting those natural laws in motion?
Well, I could say that, and I've shared this publicly. It's something that's hard for me to talk about, but I feel I have to. I mean, I had a vision when I was in junior high, and I was just in church. I wasn't in a particularly emotional state or trying to do anything. I was actually just trying to read the words out of the hymnal. And like a lot of kids in church, you're just sort of bored with the ceremony. Okay, so I wasn't in any state, and I saw a flame coming out of the cross. It was during my Catholic confirmation the night before during the rehearsal. I thought I was going to die. I was just so scared. I said, I never seen an apparition like that. And then there've been prayers that were prayed in the name of Jesus that I believe were answers to prayers, and maybe even miracles. But I said, the problem with that, so you're asking why would I be unsettled, is that those are the things that kind of motivated me to believe in God. But the one that I feel more comfortable with is something that science can confirm independently, not because I could be hallucinating, or I could be just over-interpreting, coincidences, and that can, all sorts of people can be subject to that. But something that is telling me scientifically that this is a highly unusual phenomenon, that would tell me that something like life, what I often say is life is a miracle, and therefore it needs a miracle maker. So this is very strong for me. I might, by the way, I totally respect the theistic evolutionists out there like Cy Gart, who, as far as I can tell, and I hope he'll forgive me if I'm not representing him accurately, but my understanding is he thinks the abiogenesis event was miraculous. And so that's why it holds a very special position in my life, because that's the one thing that I feel that I can argue and count on as being a miracle. And secondarily, fine tuning. One thing I should mention is Eugene Koonin, who heads up the evolutionary group at the National Institutes of Health. He's actually, I think I have a picture of him here. Let's see if I can. Yes, I'll show a picture of Eugene Koonin. One of his staff members was my professor at the FAS graduate school at the NIH. Oh, by the way, Cy Gart was also a professor there. And there's Koonin right there, and my professor's right here. And Koonin said that one way, his solution to the origin of life problem is to invoke multiple universes. So he's actually seeing the same probability problems that I am. Not exactly, but he's seeing the same barriers. So, so thank you for that question. And again, can someone try to tag me and tag a question? I'm going to see if I can do this a little more efficiently. If you tag me, and you can direct the question either to Sphincter of Doom, to Sphinx here, or myself. So please feel free to.
I see another one from, I'll just say LPP, directed to me. It's a little further down.
Was this the one?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, any process to get paint? I mean, paint is just a mastic mixture that, when hardened when applied in a thin layer, it just hardens to a solid film. I think there's plenty of natural occurring resins, and like hematite or charcoal could possibly get mixed. I mean, maybe certain oil, but maybe like modern paints, maybe not. But that doesn't mean that primitive paints couldn't have formed. The fact that intelligent agents create paint, and maybe even more sophisticated forms of paint, for the purposes of paint, does not make it a necessary condition necessarily. It makes it a sufficient condition. You need to examine it more before ruling out, saying that it's a necessary condition. It's not like there aren't instances in nature where you have various staining from resins or hematite or charcoal or ochre that you see on cave walls or from limestone.
I didn't have any further comment on that. I saw this thing: if the environment required for the reaction exists and the conditions are proper, the reaction will occur. Chemistry does not depend on intelligent agents. There's a subtlety here. It's just like saying cars don't require intelligent agents to operate, in the sense that cars, or let's say an autonomous vehicle, okay? So let's say a drone that is, I mean, there's subtleties here. One could say it's just chemistry and physics that make the car operate. You don't need an intelligent agent. The issue is whether the conditions need an intelligent agent to create those conditions. That's why we have chemical engineers. We have chemists who can create the environment. And I'm arguing that the cell operates, the first cell, the most adequate environment for a cell to emerge is another cell. That's Virchow's principle of cell theory. So when they say it's just chemistry and physics, it's like, well, chemistry and physics doesn't explain the boundary conditions, the environment that would lead to the emergence of life. That's the issue for me, anyway. So, by the way, I'd like to compliment Immutable Destiny. He's a great guy. He's worked with me to teach me a little bit of chemistry and quantum mechanics, and I respect his math ability, and I'd like to stay on good terms with him. So
I would say that it's important to recognize that how life exists now is in a very different environment than how life did, or like how life, whatever form it took, existed earlier on. Like, it wasn't necessarily the same environment. So it's not, we can't simply look at the current environment in which cells persist to rule out other forms of life under different environments where cells would have not existed or couldn't have existed or would have been too much of an energy investment to exist yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to erase.
I think we had another one from LPP too, but I think Leophilus was first.
I'm going to do Ian Chen. Ian, greetings, sir. And I hope you're doing well. He's an atheist, but he's been in my fan club, and I'm extremely grateful for him for the friendly turns we're on. And I wish him wish him well. I'm sorry. I wish him well. And let's see. He says you can. That wasn't. I think I highlighted the wrong one. Did I? He tagged me. Boy, we're getting so many here, and I apologize. Ian, there was something about natural something, and it just disappeared off of my screen.
Yeah, I see message deleted for one of Ian's. I don't know who deleted it, but I do see one that's missing.
Ian asked me something about, I'm missing people. Okay, I confused. Leophilius, apologies. I flipped this. So Ian, you can get credits to a physics course by listening to LPP Open Mic. Could be something out on your ER Academy. All right, so now I'll go to Leophilius. Apologies. I totally am confusing people because I'm a confused person. What precedent do we have for supernatural entities interacting with the natural realm to produce effects? And under what mechanism should we expect to see such phenomenon? That's an excellent question. For many of the Christians there who have experienced miracles, that's what's persuasive to them. I've in my various debates and discussions, I said, well, okay, for someone like Charles Duke, who was the youngest man to walk on the moon, when he arrived back on Earth from his trip to the moon, his marriage was falling apart. He was out having alcohol problems. He turned to religion, became a Christian. And when he was praying for a girl in the name of Jesus, her blindness was healed in a matter of minutes. So for that girl and for that astronaut, for them, that was supernatural entities. Now, the problem is, why doesn't God do that for everyone? And this would be all settled. That's a legitimate question, and one that I will be addressing, hopefully, in one of my videos. By the way, just this self-promotion, I have a video on the problem of evil. I have something called Bad Outcomes by Intelligent Design. And along those lines, I'm planning to do a video on the hidden God. So if we wonder why there are still the persistence of religion, particularly the Christian religion, it's because of the experience of miracles. And people are entitled to be skeptical because they weren't there and it can't be independently verified. On the other hand, if we say, what precedent do we have for supernatural entities interacting with the natural realm? I would argue that's why this abiogenesis thing is very important to me. And then also questions like, say, of eukaryotic evolution. These are things that are not, that are violations of normal expectation. And that diagram I showed of changed hands, homolinkage diagram, that's one example. You can infer that, one could infer that in the past something miraculous, some statistical violation had happened. And the fact that Eugene Koonin is invoking multiple universes as a solution is telling me that he's also seeing the same numbers Dr. Tan is seeing, maybe for different reasons. So Sphinx, if you had something to say, we're getting now a lot of questions, so this is good, and I don't mind trying to address them, because this is now we have a lively conversation going.
Yeah, and this is just my perspective as an atheist, is that, and I don't mean to, it's a quote of Dr. Manhattan, but it's not meant to be dismissive of one's faith, but it kind of highlights kind of my perspective on miracles, and that the quote is, miracles are by definition meaningless. Only what can happen does happen. Now that, what I take from that is that when we witness what we think is a miracle, what we should take from that is that this may expand our understanding of what we think is possible, and it's not necessarily supernatural. And I think with Leophilus's question is that from an empirical standpoint, how can you distinguish a natural, like, whatever supernatural entity influences the natural world, how do you distinguish something happening what you previously thought wasn't possible, which actually is in fact naturally possible, with the supernatural interfering with what is otherwise naturally impossible? And that's my problem with that's just my personal opinion. I mean, we can unpack that probably all day. Is that but that's just how I'm not. I don't find the idea of a miracle on its own convincing. I think it raises questions that we are definitely should be asking and look further into, though.
The way that I framed the question, and this is rhetorical, and every person will have their answer. I'm not going to tell them that they're right or wrong. I can only say what I would do. I specifically, that case of Charles Duke and the little girl, I posed this question, and it's related to the case of the blind beggar in John 9. If you're in that situation, if someone was in that situation, they're running out of options, and let's say hypothetically I was that blind beggar, and someone comes along and heals me, and I can finally see for the first time because I was blind from birth, and this man tells me he's the Messiah, would I follow him the rest of my life? So the whole point of making decisions with incomplete information, that's not unusual in anyone's life. We make,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Humans use heuristics. I don't mean to say that, oh, that's crazy, why would you ever think that?
Yeah.
I only mean to say that when you encounter something new that kind of shakes what you thought to be true or possible, that I think the proper way is to ask more questions about that. Now, obviously, we only have so much time or tools or resources to examine that, and humans by their nature are expedient. So I fully acknowledge human nature of using that kind of heuristic. So it's not, and it's not necessarily invalid either, especially since it may be an unanswerable question and it provides some sort of psychological, emotional closure and satisfaction to you. So it gives you some kind of answer so you can keep functioning and be human. So I don't mean to say oh, it's a miracle. That's just dumb. I don't mean to imply that at all. I just, so I apologize if I came across implying that.
Oh, no. I think that's, I totally get it. And if one reads the Gospels, you'll see the apostles were wrestling with this because they were very doubtful even after they had seen miracles. One gets the impression that they may have even thought they were hallucinating because they said it just they couldn't believe for joy. It's like it's too good to be true. And so I totally get that even when your senses are being flooded, you sometimes believe, well, something's just not real. And but I just pose that because really just to say where I'm at as a human being, I can't possibly know everything, and I'm making life choices, major life choices about how I spend my time, and even making moral decisions. There's some subtle moral decisions that all of us face, and committing to the Christian faith has influence on my choices. And so I will say that just like a little child, I will accept some things that I cannot prove on faith, and I just leave it at that. David asked, since I had that vision in the Catholic Church, why am I not a Catholic? It says in the book of Corinthians or other places in the New Testament, it suggests that even Christians could see apparitions. We don't know if that apparition is of God or the devil posing as angel of light. And so to this day, I don't know what that apparition was. And I had followed, I have just in reading the Bible, I just left the Catholic Church. I felt that the evangelical faith was more consistent with what was taught in the Bible, and reading the Bible was led to my a religious experience I had at around age 15, and just reading it began to transform my life, and that's how I eventually left the Catholic Church. It's entirely possible that I was visited by a benevolent spirit, but I don't know. So that's the best answer I could give.
Sure.
Let's see, Dr. Carter. I have to answer Dr. Carter's question here.
I will say that, logical pause. I think we skipped LPP's problem way up, so we can circle back to that later. But sorry, James Carter.
Dr. Carter, just for your information, Sphinx, he's a biochemist at Loma Linda University, and so he's going to ask. He's directing the question at you. So I'm just posting it there.
What would prevent a randomly synthesized ribozyme or enzyme with bond-breaking capacity from destroying all fledgling biopolymers? I'll be honest. I didn't take a lot of biochemistry in my engineering. I basically just took organic chem, and that was about it. So I don't know enough to answer that question regarding that.
Okay, so logical, plausible. If you had a question, you can tag me now. I'm a little bit more organized. Here it is. That's an insult you're reading. Oh.
The one I'm reading is, do you think biological processes are more or less complex than paint?
Oh, okay. If you want to take it, I can't. I wasn't able to find it in the list.
So yes, biological processes are by and large more complex than paint. I don't really see how that really tells us anything about what could or couldn't happen with or without an intelligent agent, though.
So, Sandy Pigeon, take care. Just for the readers, the viewers' benefit, Sandy goes to my church, McLean Bible. He has his PhD in apologetics. Prior to that, he was a Navy SEAL. So
Ah.
that's just really cool. He was a platoon leader in SEAL Team 8. So God bless you, sir. If someone wants to tag me for either to tag me for any more questions for either Sphincter or Doom, because if we run out, okay, David Neff has a few questions. Oh, by the way, before I forget, what was this about Erica and Dapper? They said they might continue on a discussion.
Well, we had discussed kind of like a series of debates, and then I guess the idea would be to have it on either DapperDino's or Guts at Gibbons channel hosted there. I mean, I'm fine with that. We could even like have like, oh, today we'll be discussing the ribozyme, or the probability issue, or this paradox. I mean, I would, that would be nice to kind of have like, if we're to do that, have kind of a focus, like we are going to talk about this specific thing, because it's very easy. There's a lot of things people can throw at the other person and then just kind of overwhelm them in what you prepared for wasn't what they came with, and then you appear to have floundered. But in reality is you just weren't sure which angle they were going to come at. And if we can a more focused discussion and like understanding what we're talking about and also what we're not talking about for a given discussion, allows for a more productive, I think, instead of just, oh, I have a gotcha because I thought of this question that you didn't anticipate, versus, okay, let's actually discuss this point and what do we do know, what do we don't, what are the strongest arguments for and against, kind of thing.
I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to DapperDino and Erica for this. As I said, I can participate. It's hard for me to host live streams. It's easier for me to jump on someone else's live stream if I'm not like a critical figure to that stream forming. Like if it's just one other person, that's going to be a little harder. If they're counting on me being there, because I have a very irregular schedule and it could be interrupted. We've been blessed tonight that my mother's just peacefully resting right now, and we've not had any interruptions. So if I could leave it at this, a sincere thank you. I would like the dialogue to continue, but I can't make any promises. So people that see me a lot on the channel here, a lot of those are pre-recorded discussions. And when you see me with having a dialogue with someone, those are pre-recorded. And sometimes we've had interruptions and I've had to pause the recording for like 20 minutes and then resume it. So I didn't mean to brush off any of the other questions here. David Neff has posed several, I think, and I've missed a few. Apologies. It's really great to see a lively chat, and maybe we'll wrap it up in 10 or 15 minutes. Would that work for you, Sphinx?
That works for me. I mean, I got nowhere to go tonight. So, but if there's more questions, I'm happy to discuss them. Or if we want to, if there was like any kind of thing that you wanted to discuss that we kind of you forgot to bring up that we can discuss, we can circle back to that too.
Well, this topic is deep enough. We could probably go on for literally years, but it was very nice getting to meet you. And my first impression has been confirmed that you're a great guy, and it's just great to hang out with you. So let me address David Neff's question. I don't know if I can actually put it on here.
I believe it's if evolution were false, why is it so useful in a wide variety of applications? Is that?
Yeah, I'd like to post it, but
sure.
Oh goodness, I
doubt I have the ability to. Let's see. I can only report it. I can't post it.
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna try to put it because it's a nice way also to keep reminding me of what the question actually was. So here it is. If evolution were false, why is it so useful in a variety of applications? I would say this is just like geocentric theory. Geocentric theory made actually pretty good predictions in terms of like the sun rising and setting, and when they added their epicycles, it was able to make predictions. That's one of the reasons it persisted. But the more accurate theory was heliocentrism, and I would say that uh, the reason it is useful in a variety of applications is it actually does properly acknowledge the similarity among organisms. Like, for example, we human beings are extremely similar to chimpanzees. A lot of creationists don't like to point that out, and then they're like, "Well, no, that's not being really straight with your audience, because when I do gene browsing, I see genes that are 100% identical between humans and chimps." And so evolutionary theory is effective because it does acknowledge the similarity, and we're able to pick out model organisms.
I,
And let's
I
see. Go ahead, Spinks.
oh, I mean, I have no problem with that question. It's just that, I mean, if we're being particular, it's not a question about abiogenesis, but evolution. But I mean, it's your channel, it's your rodeo. So I mean, if we want to talk about evolution too, that's fine too.
And let's see. So I tried to, in Leophilius, I think, also echoed that, and I tried to. And Chris Keith here, he says, "God bless you and your mom." And I wanted to also say that Chris Keith, his father passed away recently. I'd like to acknowledge him and let him know our thoughts, prayers, and love are extended to him. That happened to me 17 years ago, and that's probably the hardest thing I ever faced in my life. So I'm with you there, brother. Thank you for coming out and seeing us. Actually, geocentrism's predictions matched it somewhat. Somewhat. I mean, they predicted the sun would rise and set every day. They had some, I mean, it had some successes, particular to Tycho Brahe's version of geocentrism. I'm not saying, well, obviously we rejected it because there were enough anomalies that broke the theory. And that's what I'm actually arguing for evolutionary theory, is for all the things that they say it explains, there are many more things that it doesn't and where it's failed. And one of them is the problem of eukaryotic evolution. And Dr. James Carter, I, and Dr. Chan actually had a show that talked a little bit about the problem of eukaryotic evolution. And I showed that even if we assume the nested hierarchies exist that show the patterns of similarity and diversity, that's not an adequate explanation for the emergence of eukaryotes.
Now,
So, Danny has a question. Please go on.
and I have a question. Maybe my history is a little rusty. I thought Tycho Brahe's observations were used to inform Kepler's laws of motion. I don't remember Tycho Brahe being a geocentrist, but then again, my history is a little rusty on that.
It was it was kind of a quasi geocentric model. It was a breakthrough model, meaning it was kind of in between helio and geocentrism. I mean, I looked at it, it's very complicated, but it had some just startling things. And that's why he's honored, because his physical observations were actually pretty good, and he had some pretty ingenious solutions. So
was it like the solar system rotates around Mercury or Venus instead, or something?
Someone could look it up, and I really want to make a show on geocentrism because it has a lot of parallels to questions we have, where a theory has enough going for it that we think it's correct, but then there are these anomalies that kind of just break it, and retrograde motion was one of those. So Danny had the question: you should point out that the truth value and utility don't co-vary in a regular way. Okay, Danny is our resident philosopher. He's our teacher of philosophy, and I hope to do some shows with him. And
I minored in philosophy.
So you could probably answer what this is better than I can.
I mean, he's right. Like how useful something is versus like how true something is. Like there are plenty of things that are false. There are useful lies. There are plenty of things that are true that aren't useful for a particular application. So I mean, but I'm not. I guess I missed something where like how that's relevant here. I guess I'm not sure what the connection is.
Okay, I'm going to address this one. Immutable Destiny says a lot of models suggest eukaryotes emerge from symbiogenesis. The problem is, even if we assume symbiogenesis, and I had at least 4 videos on this issue. 3 of them were actually just reading peer-reviewed papers that were critical of symbiogenesis, saying even if we assume that symbiogenesis happened, it doesn't explain the major features of eukaryotes, such as the membrane-bound nucleus, things like the spliceosome, and this would also, with membrane-bound nuclei, it would include the nuclear import-export and then the associated localization signals. Not to mention that 85% of the mitochondrial genes are located in the nucleus. So there are a lot of problems, not just with the symbiogenesis theory, but even if we assume it, it doesn't explain something like chromatin and chromatin remodeling and all the issues there. And so that's what we were criticizing. And so if you look on my channel for like Nerds Go Clubbing, the playlist, Nerds Go Clubbing, as in journal clubs, there'll be 3 or 4 things specifically on eukaryotes. Plus there is a video where Dr. Tan, Dr. Carter, and myself talked about problems with eukaryotic evolution, specifically intracellular transport. Actually, Sphincter, if you just wanted to say a few words, because that question was important enough that I think I'd like to provide Immutable Destiny a link to the discussions. And it's going to take me a while to type here on my other computer. So if you had anything on your mind, and maybe we're getting a little closer to, maybe in 5 minutes we'll shut the stream down, but I wanted to provide something for Immutable Destiny here, if that's okay with you.
Oh, do you want me to just continue with the questions in chat then, or?
Well, yes. So
Okay, let's see.
Just speak whatever's on your mind. I'm kind of rooting for the team that's going to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, just because I don't want Tom Brady to win the Super Bowl.
Hey, I went to college in Patriots Central, so I'm all for anything that. I mean, Boston fans are so spoiled by championships, and they even with Tom Brady going to Tampa Bay, they still go Tom. That's our boy. He's all grown up now. So anything that kind of takes them down a notch to where hey, not everybody gets to win all the time, and Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are. And that whole team is great. So I mean, if they won, it's not like they just snuck in or anything. But I don't want a blowout. Tom Brady always keeps it close. Patrick Mahomes doesn't always. So it'll be interesting to see. I guess when I say Tom Brady doesn't always keeps it close, he's rarely blown out himself. He's not afraid to step on the gas given the opportunity. And I just want a good game. And I mean, I could talk all day about my opinions on how good Tom Brady is and what are the appropriate metrics in gauging the best quarterback. And I don't know how much time you want to allow on that. But Patrick Mahomes, I think, is really the future of the NFL. I mean, the Tom Brady's going to retire soon. Peyton Manning retired recently. Drew Brees retired. Aaron Rodgers has been in the league 15 years, so he's getting up there too, and he's fantastic. But Patrick Mahomes, it's his 3rd, 4th year, and he's not even in his prime yet, and he's just already kicking booty. So I too am rooting for the Chiefs, but I don't have a team, so I root for a good game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Me too. Well, I just needed a little bit of levity here, just to even I can't stand my own nerdiness. I have to kind of just talk about something else. So I'm almost done typing for immutable here. I provided a playlist to the stuff on eukaryotes for him. So,
What is
Jamie Russell
CG?
says, "Go Seahawks."
I hot take. Russell Wilson is overrated. That's just my take. It doesn't really matter. I actually live in Seahawk country, and yeah, I think people are coming around to that idea that like Russell Wilson isn't a bad quarterback, but he's not as good as people think, and and that's perfectly fine. I mean, all the great quarterbacks, like I actually looked this up. Almost every quarterback that's won multiple Super Bowls had phenomenal teams around them. They all had top 10 defenses and points allowed. They all almost all of them had like first round buys for nearly every Super Bowl. I mean, there's only one quarterback that's won multiple Super Bowls without a top 10 defense, and it's Eli Manning. Nobody thinks Eli Manning is the best of all time.
Oh, that first Super Bowl. Anyway, this is kind of delightful that Logical Probable just posted the link. And let me see. There it is. This is Danny. So this is where one of the after shows is. So thank you, Danny, for hosting this for us. And Sphinx. I guess we're running toward the end of the show. I'd like to express my personal thanks for you joining me tonight. It's been a delightful conversation.
Likewise.
This is more the kind of conversation I like. And if you had I'm just presuming this isn't goodbye. This isn't, we're just ending our stream. So if you had any, I'll give you the last word before I shut the stream down.
Go Chiefs. It was great being here.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all our viewers. And please all take care and God bless you. Have a good evening.